Hi guys, and welcome to part 2 of this video series on Selenium WebDriver with JavaScript on the LambdaTest YouTube channel. During this session, I will be helping you write your first Selenium WebDriver test using JavaScript. So in part 1 of this video series, we focused on getting everything set up to allow us to write our test. So we've installed Node.js, we've downloaded Selenium WebDriver package, and we've set up our project. During this video, we're going to focus on writing our first test. First up, we're going to look at selecting an IDE. Then we can begin creating our test line by line to see how it works. During this part, we'll also look at the use of locators to find elements on a page. Once we've completed our test, we will run it locally and analyze the results. And then finally, we'll do a full review of everything we've achieved in this session. So let's begin by selecting an IDE. For the duration of this video series, I will be using Visual Studio Code, a free IDE which you can download on Mac or Windows. If you don't want to use VS Code, you're more than welcome to follow along in any other IDE you'd like to use. Just be aware that some of the buttons and actions might be a bit different on your IDE. So now that we've selected an IDE, we can get to the fun bit and write some code. So I'm going to jump straight into Visual Studio Code here, and I've actually already opened up the project that we created in the previous lesson, our Selenium demo project. And if I expand this, you can see we have our package.json file that we went through in the, and we also have this directory here which contain all of our npm packages. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a new directory on the root of our folder. I'm going to call it tests. And as you can imagine, this is where all of our test files will go. Now from here, I'm going to create a new file, which I will call first test.js.js, meaning it's a JavaScript file. I'll just enter to create that. So now we have our blank.js file where we can start writing our test. So as we write our test, I'm going to assume you have a little bit of JavaScript knowledge. So the terms variable and function mean something to you. You don't have to understand everything, but a little bit of understanding will go a long way as we write this test. The first thing we need to do is add a required statement at the top of our file. The required statement allows us to pull in specific functionality from a Node module into our test. We'll be using Selenium WebDriver, so we'll need to require this Node module in our test in order to use the Selenium WebDriver keywords. For us, we need to enter const curly braces builder equals require brackets, and inside quotation marks we can add our node module, Selenium WebDriver. And let's just finish with a semicolon. Great, that's our first line of code written. Next up, we need to create a function. A function will be used to house all of our test code. That means that when we execute the function, our test will run. In order to create our function, we will use the keyword async, followed by function, and now we need to give our function a name. In this instance, we'll just call it example. We can follow that up with an open and close brackets, followed by open and closed curly braces. Now our code will sit between these curly braces, so we can expand this out a bit. Now that we've got our function, we can start writing our code to navigate to an application. But first, we need an application to navigate to. In this demo, we'll be using the LambdaTest sample to-do site. This allows us to add new to-dos to this list. During this test, we'll navigate to this page and add a new to-do before closing the page again. So let's write the code now. So back we go to VS Code in order to write these steps. Before we write any code, I'm just going to add some comments so we know exactly what steps we need to do. So first, we know we need to launch the browser. Then we need to navigate to our app location. And for the purpose of this test, we need to add a to-do. And at the end, we will close the browser. Perfect. So during this demo, we will write the code for each one of these steps. So let's start by launching the browser. We do that by using the builder command that we required at the top of our file. So I will write let driver, so this is our variable name, equals await new builder, brackets, and now we need to specify which browser we're going to use. So I will do for browser and then open a bracket, and in here within quotation marks we specify our browser. So in this demo we will be using Firefox. We downloaded the Firefox driver in the previous session, so that should all be set up. And then finally we can add build brackets and a semicolon at the end. Up, we can navigate to our application for this step here. To do that, we can use driver that we stored as a variable. So I'll do await driver dot get, and again open brackets, within quotation marks we can specify the endpoint that we want to navigate to. If I go back to this page here, this is our endpoint, so I'll just copy this, go back to our test and paste it in. So now we have our endpoint that we wish to navigate to. So at this point, if we wanted to see what was happening, we could actually run this. To do so, we need to call this function. So at the end of our file, I will add example, which is the name of our function. So at this point, if we wanted to see what was happening, we could actually run this. To do so, we need to call this function. So at the end of our file, I will add example, which is the name of our function, and then just open and closed brackets. So this line here will actually call our function, and that will in turn execute these steps. Now what we're expecting to see at the moment is a new instance of Firefox launch and navigate to this endpoint here. To run this, we can go to the terminal, open up a new terminal, and we can just enter node and then the name of our file, including the directory. So in this instance we have node tests /firsttest.js. So if I run this now, you should see that a new Firefox browser is launched and it's navigated to our application. Perfect. So I will go back to our test. Okay. Now we can add a to-do. So if I go back to our application, you can see that in order to add a to-do, we need to be able to enter some text into this field here. So now we will look at how we can interact with this field to add a new to-do. Locators are an integral part of automating web applications. Using locators enables us to find and interact with web elements upon a web page. In our example, we want to be able to find this text field here so that we can add a new to-do. In order to find a way that we can locate this element, we can right-click and select Inspect. This brings up the Inspector window. From here, we can find a unique way of locating this element. I could right-click on here, select Copy and XPath to select the XPath to this element. But in this instance, I'm going to use the ID field here instead. So the ID for this element is sample to do text. So we can use this in our test to locate this field so we can enter the text. So let's do that now. We'll jump back to Visual Studio Code, and under our Add to Do section, we will write our next line of code. So just like before, we start with await driver, but now we want to find the element. So we will use .find element, and as I mentioned, we'll be using ID. So we open brackets by .id and open brackets again, and here we can enter the text of the ID that we want to find inside quotation marks. So if we go back to our web application, we want to use this sample to do text. So I'll copy that in here. I will paste that. So this will find the element which has the ID sample to do text. Once we've entered the text, we need to be able to submit it so it's added as a new to do. So if we go back to our application, we could interact with this button here in order to add our new to do, or we could simply press the enter key. And we'll be using the enter key to submit our new to do. So if I go back to my test, we can go back inside these brackets, add a comma, and we're going to use the Selenium keyword of key, followed by a dot, and followed by the key that we want to use. So we want to use the key return, all in capitals, and then I'll just add a semicolon at the end. Now at this point, our test is actually going to fail. And the reason is we're using two key words here in this line of code, which we need to require from Selenium WebDriver. The by and key. So in order to require them, we can add them to this constant here. So in here, we can just do comma by and then comma key. Perfect. Now they have been added into our file. we should be able to run this. So if I save my file, go back to our terminal and use the same command, node test/firsttest.js, hit run now, and we should see that a new Firefox browser opens up and our text is added to the field. So now we just have one line left to write in our test. It's always best practice to close the browser down once your test is finished. So we'll write a line of code now to close the browser. All we need to do is use await driver like we've previously used, and this time we're going to use .quit, just like that. So this will quit the browser once it's completed the steps above. So if I save this and run now, using the same command in the terminal, you'll see that a new instance of Firefox is launched. We navigate to the web page and the browser is closed. Now, every time we've run our test so far, we've used the terminal to trigger it. So we've used this node command followed by the path to the file we'd like to execute. I just wanted to draw your attention to the run button in Visual Studio Code. Now, most other IDEs will have an equivalent button, so have a look, you'll be able to find it somewhere. Up here, we have a play button, and that allows us to execute the code outside of the terminal. By pressing play, it will execute the test just in the same way as we saw using the terminal. If you're using VS Code and you don't see this icon, you may need to navigate to this extensions icon here in the menu and then search for Code Runner. And then you'll be able to install Code Runner, which will enable this button. So if I press this button now to run my test, you'll see that the output screen down here has started running our test, and shortly we should see a Firefox browser open and our test is getting executed. Great job! So we now have a test that we can execute using Selenium WebDriver and JavaScript. Let's take a quick look at everything we've achieved in this session. So, we've learned how to require the Selenium WebDriver node module into our test file. We've also learned how we can create a new asynchronous function and give it a name. Once we created our function, we were then able to write our code for our test inside of the function. First, we built a new browser instance for Firefox. Secondly, we navigated to our web application using driver.get. Once we were on our web application, we could use the find element by ID to locate the text box and add our new to-do, learn Selenium. We also saw how we could use key.return to mimic pressing the return key on your keyboard. Then lastly, we used driver.quit to close the browser. We called our function by adding this example down here. Once we completed our test, we learned how we could execute this test either via the terminal or via the run code option in our IDE. So that wraps up part 2 of this video series on Selenium WebDriver and JavaScript. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me on Twitter using the handle @RyanTester, or you can contact LambdaTest directly. If you've enjoyed this video, be sure to check out the other videos on the LambdaTest YouTube channel. Alternatively, you can go to the LambdaTest blog and find many articles about a range of testing topics, including automation testing using Selenium WebDriver and JavaScript. Be sure to check out the certifications page on the LambdaTest website so you can learn how to earn your LambdaTest Selenium certification. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next video.